geography of the place that you're looking at. Um, she looked in Howard County and there they were. They were in Roanoke, right on the county line. I mean, so that's another thing to keep track of, not only the neighbors, but who's next door. And I mean, where they live and local, you know, on a creek or on the county's edge a lot of times. This is simply related to a poem that we found a grave that was marked. The people didn't have enough money to do a real headstone, so they put it in marble sculpt. It's just, I wasn't intending to show that on it. This is Cece Rice, who was working at Randolph County History Center, and Pam and I had worked with her a whole lot before going to Randolph. I mean, before Pam went to Randolph County, and that's one of the people I said, go see Cece Rice. They've been on the phone. She looks through the thing. Pam said, I think I know who the owner is. Pam said she looked it up, and what would you do? Okay. She looked at all the men, all the old slave owners named Robertson or anything like Robertson in the 1850 and 60 census. And she found a Philip Robinson. And she said, I think I know who the owner is. That's what she told me. And so she checked with Cece, and Cece says, well, let's look in the 1884 Randolph County censuses. And those of you who do regular US genealogy know that there's this period where every county did a history and wrote down all the people's names and everything. I have Randolph County, it's about that fat. Anyway, okay, change. This says on 1884, 1884 census, the sale of the following slaves took place as late as January 1864. They were owned by Philip Robertson's estate and were sold on the courthouse door in Fayette. Dick, blah, 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 Baltimore, age 25, bought by David Dennis for $100. Now, we just saw that Lee and Lewis, the brothers, I think, of Amanda, were sold in 1856 for $1,000. What's this $100? Why do you think that they were going to be sold at the last minute? 1865, this is, I believe.
64.
Yeah. Why were they $100? They probably weren't crippled or anything. I mean, you know, why do you think they might be sold for $100?
South was losing the war.
Yeah, prices going down fast. That's right, because it's almost the very end, and they were hearing that it was the war was going to be over, and a very likely chance that slavery is disallowed. You know, okay. Anyway, that's the proof that her ancestor really, she found that in the county record. It's possible to look there. Those are very important. I mean, you just might luck out. As you well know, in genealogy, it's very much a gambling kind of thing. Okay. And we found this picture of actually Philip Robertson in another book. I just couldn't believe it that we found his picture. Okay, go on. Now, Cece, and then at the Historical Society put down a paper and said, well, let's just see. When she found out that Philip Robertson owned Baltimore, she said, let's just look at his family, because I believe that might be one of Anne's. And she looked at Cece's map for Pam. I mean, this is what she actually wrote down. That's why it's so scratchy. And it says she's doing the children. Joseph Robertson and Philadelphia Snell had these children, Philip, Hiram, Joseph, Joe or something, Francis, anyway, but Courtney, James, Susan, and Socrates. Remember Courtney? You remember Courtney Jackson way back there? She's mine. So Pam calls me up and says, and your family owned my family. And we'd been friends on the phone for a couple of years. And I thought, oh my God. And I'd already tracked Amanda's descendants and gone to see them. And I said, this is everywhere. Okay, I tracked a man as descendant to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And in any case, this gives you the background for why Pam and I then we recovered from this. It took us about a half a year and we've had our hassles, but then she came to visit me and we had never seen each other before in person. And that was quite interesting. And I won't tell you all about that. She's coming. Well, I'm getting married in about a week and a half and she's going to be at our wedding. And I even ask if, because Pam and I have given presentations about 32 times across the country at different times. We haven't, the most recent one was in 18. So we haven't done it for a long time, but I wanted to maybe do it at Oakmont in a big place, because anyway, you've seen some of them, some of the slides, but it's much more fun when Pam's with me. We're both doing. Anyway, that's enough for now. And I'll give it back to you.
Okay. I'm going to take a real quick ending with my slides, and then we will open to questions. Okay. The last challenge is, in fact, the difficulty of dealing with what Ann just talked about, where you, in fact, are talking to someone who is a descendant of a slave of your family owned. And within that, when you're talking about someone who shares an ancestor, is one of the places where DNA actually works. While it's hard to do, and just showed you how it can be done to find the descendant, this is my DNA line on Ancestry. And if you remember Robert Gore, this is what Ancestry says. There's Robert, my fourth great grandfather. And I'm related to a whole bunch of Green Gore's kids, which I should be. After all, he's the brother of my ancestor. And it's related to all of the children who came through those concubinage relationships. So DNA can work too. And we will see more of that, I suspect. So leaving behind slaves, once again, not the happiest of conditions, but that was the way the world was. There was a question over in the corner, and I'll take that. If you have a question online, I would recommend, I'm going to break out of this and okay, I got everybody up. Please. And then you can use the mic the first time, and then I'll let you hand it off if there's somebody else that has one.
Well, I was just wondering what the purpose of the slave schedule was, and it assumed it was for taxation of,
Well, the
Of the
census
slaves.
records were, all the American censuses were dictated by the Constitution as the methodology of allocating the representation in Congress.
that's not my question.
I know what you did. So
Okay.
you want to know why the slave schedules
Yes,
were separate.
yes.
Okay.
No, I wanted, no, that's not,
Oh, try it again.
that wasn't my question. Why were the slaves listed at some point at all? What was the purpose of listing the number of slaves? Was it for the purposes of taxation? Okay, so the federal government was taxing the slave owners, or the states were
Let
taxing?
me see if I can restate that, because I may not have said it well. From the first 1790 census, they had to list how many slaves there were, because the representation in Congress was based on one person for every white and 3/5 a person for every slave. So you had to know how many slaves there were. Then, as has happened in every census up until the last one, some characters in Congress got together and said, we'd like to know this too. Why don't we find out what their ages are? Why don't we find out? So, but the information, the basic information, was driven by congressional representation and required by the Constitution. Did not have anything to do with taxes.
What are you doing?
Were they
Thank
eventually,
you. I got back from Reno safely. I was there for the long weekend for my friend's birthday. I don't know if I told you about that. Anyway, I'll try you again. Bye.
Who we lost there. Okay, I'm sorry.
were the slave owners ever taxed for their
s-
slaves?
Oh, sure.
What, again, my question, by the federal government or by the state governments?
State government. The,
State governments.
as a matter of fact, one of the records that I've been enchanted with in my own family is in trying to determine who Mary is, who marries Levi Agee. Okay, I know his wife's name was Mary. I can't figure out who her parents were. What? But it turns out that she has a slave. And it turns out that the person who's most likely to have been her father in his will states, and to my daughter Mary, I shall give a slave so-and-so. And how do I know that the slave's in Levi's house? Because of tax records. Okay, you were
That's what I
taxed,
was getting
you
to.
were taxed for every slave.
So there are potential tax records available.
There are potentially tax
Uh-huh.
records.
Okay.
Unfortunately, most of the Virginia ones have been destroyed from the 1700s. Okay, which was sad.
Well, it's also an interesting insight into history, because the Confederate States didn't want to give up this source of income, taxation of slaves, which that's not commonly known as part of our history. It's Interesting.
I'm sure that that was a component. Taxes are always interesting. I should comment, Anne mentioned this earlier. A number of people, now that we've gotten into more tracking of slave ancestry of previously enslaved, there are things like you can go online and find the names of the slaves referenced in every will and inventory in every county in Virginia. So if you know that you're looking for Pompey in a particular county, you can look and say, does he show up in anybody's will or inventory? Okay. And did you want to add something? Okay. Any questions online? We have one here from Jane. More and more of them are going online, but recognize that sometimes, yeah, but recognize it requires the love of someone like Cece, the librarian, okay, to oversee that activity. Or in many cases, it requires, like the Sonoma County Genealogical Society does this for records in Sonoma County. Okay, it'll tell, parcel them out and tell them, we'll tell somebody to do this and someone else to do that. Okay. Please do. Use mic. On Zoom. I'll do it. I'll do it. Here you go. Here you go, Ann.
Slave schedules are online. People have indexed a lot of the marriage records. There's all kinds of resources that are available. I recently found one that is simply a compilation of all the freed people who had lived in this particular county there are a lot of people working on this. And I also wanted to add that I'm a part of a group called Coming to the Table. You can find online, and Bittersweet is a subpart of that that organization. And now it's growing, and there are subgroups of it. They're all about looking for people who are descendants of either enslavers or enslaved. There's the one.
I will take the traveling mic.
I have an interesting story. I look really lily white to you, but I have African American descendancy. One of my third great grandfathers had slaves, and he had daughters by one of the slaves. So when I go to 23andMe, I have third and fourth cousins who are African American. And when I look at my genealogy or my ancestry, I'm 0.2% African American. That is Northern Africa. And my brother is the same thing, but he adds a 0.1% for Sub-Saharan Africa. So it gets very interesting. And I go on 23andMe and I see, wow, look at all those third cousins who are Black, So yeah, it's part of who we are.
It was once said, and I believe it to be true, although I can't find the reference anymore, that Ancestry studied the DNA based on what state you lived in. And the DNA for those whites who lived in South Carolina had the highest percentage of African American gene background of anybody in the country. And you can sort of see why. Okay, if there are no questions, we have one more, yes.
George, if we have people in Missouri in 1830 and 40, and how do we, so I've looked at the normal census records, how would we determine that they owned slaves?
They would be in the census record. If they're not in the census record, then they did not. Now, that doesn't mean that when they moved from Virginia, they hadn't left behind slaves.
Is there a line item in the 1830 or 40 census that would list slaves?
Yeah, it's in 1830, it's over on the right-hand side. You just keep reading across, and in 1830, I think you have to go to the second page.
Okay, that's the trick then, looking
correct,
way
yeah.
out.
And incidentally, also on Black marriages, which is a great place to look, it'll often say, or a list even of, there are city directories that show all the names of all the people that live in that city at that time. Okay, you've probably looked at city directories, and it'll have a little B or a C next to it if the person is
Yeah.
Black or colored. They really want people to know that, oh my God, they might be different than whites, something like that. It's really astounding what you can find in the record. They were very concerned about that. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Next month, we're going to have a different history lesson. We're going to talk about the DAR and the SAR, Daughters of the American Revolution and Sons of the American Revolution. We're going to cover it in two different ways. One of them is we'll have a couple of folks here from Oakmont who are DAR and SAR members who will share how you do that, how you become a member, and then I'll also run us through a little litany about how you can use those records in your own genealogical research. Okay, you may or may not be interested or may even qualified to be a DAR descendant, but there may be information in there that can be quite valuable. And it's all online. Thank you much, Lee. And Anne, thank you so much.